Thank you, David. I'd forgotten that song. It's a fun one. And I would like to have a little rain. That would be fine, but the rest of it, absolutely yes. So thank you, everybody, for choosing to be with this Center for Spiritual Living today. In this world where most centers and churches are still online, we know you do have a lot of choices to pick from. So we're really, really glad, and I'm really, really glad that you chose to be here with us today. Today's talk title is called Precedent Does Not Bind Principle. It's one of my most favorite topics that I get to talk about. In plain language, it means just because something has always been that way doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Is that liberating for you? Or does it feel unnerving? Did you take a hard in-breath when I said it? Does it make you want to ask the question, but what about like control and certainty and predictability and order? So my question for you is, what does the idea of order mean to you? This is a very important question. And an equally important question is, where did you get that idea of what order is? Whose rule of order are you living by? And how much credibility do you give to somebody else's rule that you bought into sometime, once upon a time, probably a long time ago? So before we started this morning, we were talking about the fires that are still burning in the Catalinas. And according to this morning's report, it's at almost 105,000 acres, which is a lot, but we're up to 45% containment, which is amazing. And almost 1,200 people are working on that fire. And it's going to be hot and windy today. So there's all of that swirl, right? So what is your point of view about this fire? Is it scary? Is it ugly? Is it a horrible thing? Is it natural? Is it what? I know people who hate the fires. I know lots and lots of people who are very afraid or very anxious or very worried about the fire. I know some people who are physically affected by the smoke. And now we may have the smoke from the Saharas blowing in as well. And I do know some people who are annoyed about the fires because they want to go hiking. And the local state parks are closed because of the fires, so they can't hike. So the fire brings up annoyance in them. And I know of the 1,200 extraordinarily skilled people who are keeping the fires away from individuals and from population centers. And I remember hearing a report early in the fire from a fish and wildlife guy, weeks ago now, who was answering questions people had about the bighorn sheep and their habitat being damaged by this fire. His point of view was that the sheep could get out of the way and wouldn't be harmed by the fire themselves, and the new growth that would come up almost immediately after the fires burned would be like a giant mega salad bar for them. And I've also heard since that day that much of the area that burned or is burning hasn't been burned in over 50 years. So there's a lot of very low value vegetation and crap that is being turned into carbon, which will benefit the wildlife and the new growth. Rejuvenation for the area. And everything will benefit. The giant saguaros, which people worry about as well, are generally not damaged by fires like this. Those cacti that are so emblematic for us actually benefit from the clearing out of the quote-unquote trash vegetation. So where is order in this story? What's your story about the fires in the Catalinas? Is it scary? Is it unnerving? Is it unsettling? Is it different? Is it strange? Is it awkward? Don't get me wrong. I'm really grateful for the fire crews that have been so protective of life, and I'm awestruck at their persistence and care. Do you know they're even planning ahead and working on minimizing what could happen when it finally does start raining and the monsoons come? And these burned, unvegetated areas have the potential to become mudslides? They're thinking about that too. So what does order look like for you? It's every possible combination in there, right? Unchangeable order is one thing, and then order that moves through natural cycles is something else entirely. As a once upon a time biologist and ecologist that I have been and still am, I personally recognize that maintenance of ecosystems by fire is part of my sense of right order. Natural process, right order, something that works as designed. So why do we like it when things stay like they were? Why do we like precedent? Why do we like what has gone before to be the future that we can see? Why do we like, well, this used to be true, to be in charge of the future? The short answer for many people is that we know pretty much what's going to happen. Life is predictable, so we feel safe. And frankly, honestly, we like not having to think, and we like not having to work that hard. I came across a new old guy this week, an educator, minister, and teacher by the name of Dr. Benjamin Mays, who was inspired by Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington, and who was also teacher, mentor, and friend of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many others of his generation. He wrote, "The tragedy of life is not found in failure, but complacency. Not in you doing too much, but doing too little. Not in you living above your means, but below your capacity. It's not failure, but aiming too low. That's life's greatest tragedy." And an Emerson quote that I've shared before, "People wish to be settled. Only as far as they are unsettled is there any hope for them." Yeah, there's that. So recent world and local events have thrown a lot of that predictability and perceived safety and certainty that we all enjoy so much and find so comfortable completely and totally out the window. I wrote about this at length in last week's newsletter. The part of me that knows we are all capable of so much more than we have settled for in the past is really delighted at all the changes that are coming our way. We have an opportunity to create something new, something more vital, and something more filled with life. So what does that have to do with principle and precedent? Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind, page 162, wrote, "Because we fail to recognize that principle is not bound by precedent, we limit our faith to that which has already been accomplished, and few miracles result. When through intuition, faith finds its proper place under divine law, there are no limitations, and what are called miraculous results follow." So what's miraculous in your world? How willing are you to become different from what you have been, especially if it brings with it unimagined miracles? The elephant in the room questions are, what kind of world do we want to live in? And who are we willing to become for that to happen? Futurist Buckminster Fuller wrote, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." It's so much easier to fight and rage against the machine as it's presently structured, and it feels so self-satisfying because we feel like we've actually done something, when in fact, not so much. Making noise, causing commotion, doesn't usually create change. The path of making noise is doomed to failure because we're not actually changing anything. So there's an Einstein quote that Einstein didn't actually say, which is, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we use to create them. He's been misquoted or misrepresented dozens, if not hundreds of times. He did say something like it in a telex. In this quote, which is most like the one that was invented, he was referring to global annihilation by nuclear war. He wrote in a telex, "This new type of thinking is essential if mankind is going to survive and move forward to higher levels." In another place, he did say, "If we want to improve the world, we cannot do it with scientific knowledge, but with ideals." Confucius, Buddha, Jesus, and Gandhi have done more for humanity than science has done. We must begin with the heart of man, with his conscience, and the values of conscience that can only be manifested by selfless service to humanity. It's pretty amazing that Einstein was that much of a philosopher and poet, but he was. Since I've talked about why precedent, what has happened before, doesn't have to rule the day, I now want to talk about principle. We like to think that principle is some big, fancy thing that's an ideal that we reach towards. But I hate to tell you, principle is what we truly believe, enacted by the law of cause and effect, remembering that cause is always mental. What we truly believe creates our reality. The song that David sung, "I control the weather," WHETHER. I control what I see by what I truly believe. And if we don't like our reality, then we get to look at what we believe and change it accordingly. And then what happens in the world in front of our eyes has to follow suit. It has no choice. The problem is, changing what we believe is hard, because most of us struggle to figure out what we truly, absolutely, profoundly believe. And fundamentally and irritatingly, most often we believed contradictory things. If that hurts your head, you're in good company. Now, if you don't like the way I language this, I'll give you the words from Dr. Jean Houston's foreword to the Science of Mind text. She wrote, "This is a book for the ages. It is to be charged in the alembic, which is a crucible of change, to enter into the partnership with God, to relearn the laws of co-creation. It lays out the blueprint for remaking the mind and reenacting the world." She continues, "If I were to state the essence of this teaching, it would be that the highest God and the innermost God is one God. The core of each human being is the original creative genius of the universe. Consciously or unconsciously, we direct the flow of mind, universal mind in form. This grants us tremendous power, and with it, the innate responsibility to make or break our world through the extraordinary working power of our minds." And she goes on, "The powers of this second Genesis lie within us. But this means We must agree to attune and orchestrate our thoughts and emotions toward higher purposes and creative ends. In this we have help, for Spirit assures that the lure of becoming is always calling. We are limited only by concept and the refusal that comes from ignorance or laziness to mount the scope of thought. I'll leave you to finish reading the rest of her foreword. It's very inspiring and challenging. Now from James Baldwin. Though we do not wholly believe it yet, the interior life is your real life. The intangible dreams of people have tangible effects on the world. What's on the inside of each of us must show up on the outside. That's the law. Fortunately, once we realize and accept this as true, we finally have a handle that we can work with. I was remembering this morning an old story, and I don't remember the origin of it, but basically the story goes that every problem, I'll use that word, has two handles. One that you can pick up and it doesn't work. It may be blame or shame, or it's somebody else's problem, or it's not my fault, or I didn't do it, or, I wasn't around yet. And then it has a second handle that allows you to deal with what's in that bucket. So recognizing that what's on our inside must show up on our outside gives us a handle to work with this world that we're living in. In an On Being podcast this week, Krista Tippett interviewed Jason Reynolds, a young Black man who is the national ambassador for young people's literature for the Library of Congress. He talks about how curiosity and imagination give children, and all of us really, the stamina, my word, and the fortitude, his word, to move forward into our next chapter in our own individual and collective global futures. One of his quotes, "What one can imagine internally, what one can think about when nobody knows, when nobody's around, one's secrets could shift human life." I'll read that again. What one can imagine internally, what one can think about when nobody knows, when nobody is around, one's secrets could shift human life. This year, with Ibrahim X. Kendi, he wrote and released a book for young adults called Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You. He talks about how racism is the biggest hoax ever constructed, and why it was constructed, what the purpose was, and, more importantly, how love and truly loving every single member of every single ethnicity, even the ones you don't like, don't understand, make you nervous, don't want to accept, don't necessarily want to have lunch with them, finding a space of seeing every single being, every single two-legged that walks, and some would say even others, is key to seeing everyone as truly human and evolving, able to evolve into a world that works for everyone. I'll put a link to this podcast in the newsletter so you can listen to it, and there is a transcript if you prefer to read it for yourself. We're moving down a path that could lead to a new world, one that works for everyone. And we won't succeed using the same rules and playing the same game that we've always played. We also won't get there by throwing out what presently exists and disenfranchising participants in the process. We need a new model that makes the old model obsolete. So in the next 3 months, CSLT will be exploring this new territory. We'll start next Sunday with a guest speaker, Dr. Carmen Smith, who will be speaking about how love changes America. I hope you'll plan to attend our Zoom service that Sunday next week. She's a very powerful speaker. Then we'll move quite quickly through a series of 3 book studies. What that means is I'm going to read them, and if you want them, you can read them, and I'm going to talk about them on Sundays. The first in July is David Rico's Triggers, How We Can Stop Reacting and Start Healing. In August, it will be Rosamund Stone Zander and Benjamin Zander's book, The Art of Possibility. I preferred the audiobook for that one because he's an orchestra conductor and he uses music as some of his examples, so I think it's more fun. But it's about the importance of relationship and connection and how our sense of individual, separate, Rosamund calls them calculating selves, get us in trouble and get in our way. Very good book. And then in September, we'll look at Barbara Marx Hubbard's book, Emergence, The Shift from Ego to Essence, 10 Steps to the Universal Human. I believe the path of the universal human may be a model that moves us in the direction we long for and desire, and I think it's appropriate and worthwhile that we should track that way and see if we can internally make the changes that create a functional world. So Dr. Ernest Holmes wrote in 365 Science of Mind, page 186, "We are made perfect when we enter into the communion of love with one another, and when the invisible essence of life, and with the invisible essence of life. Love is the fulfillment of the law. That is, we do not make highest use of the law unless we use it motivated by love, by a sincere desire to express unity, harmony, and peace. It's by getting clear on what our values truly are and keeping them aligned with greatest good, peace, love, joy, and life, that we stand a chance to create a new heaven and a new earth. Once we're clear and congruent, it becomes relatively easy and obvious to act in alignment with that new point of view. I invite you to join me in envisioning and embodying this new world, a world that works for everybody." So I want to close with an old favorite poem from Rumi, and then a short piece of a poem by David Whyte. Rumi first. "The breezes at dawn have secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the 2 worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep." And then from David Whyte, the name of the poem is The Winter of Listening. This is only a very small section of it. "What is precious inside us does not care to be known by the mind in ways that diminish its presence. What we strive for in perfection is not what turns us into the lit angel we desire. What disturbs and then nourishes has everything we need. Inside everyone is a great shout of joy waiting to be born. So find your great shout of joy. Find your wisdom that wants to be let loose and shared. Find that piece of you that's waiting to come out and invite it into the public arena. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I want to go ahead and speak the community prayer into the room. So if anything I said spoke to you and reminded you of something you want to remember and carry into your week, put it in the front of your mind and claim it as something that you wish to own more of. And I'll say the words. In this amazing and holy space, in this opportunity to experience and express more of the divine that lives in, as, and through me, in, as, and through each of the beloveds who have joined us on this Sunday morning. I recognize a greater expression of life being birthed, showing up. I see the prisms of light. I hear the new songs. I see the new expressions and experiences. I see the new ways of being love, being joy, being peace. And I see the new acceptance. I see this encompassing all beings. I see it enfolding all beings, whether we have historically included them in our circle or not. Everybody's in. There's no one who's outside this circle. God is all there is, and that shows up and lives as each one of us. So I recognize that as a true statement, and I recognize I continue to become, and I recognize that each individual also continues to expand, to grow, to express, to experience more life, more light, more love, more of what brings enjoyment and delight to this thing called life. So I recognize the truth of these words and I relax into them and I let them out. I accept them as already true and I release them into their full expression. Blessing it all as amazing. I let it be, and so it is.